In the spirit of reconciliation, the Rural Press Club of Victoria acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. Welcome to our Rural Press Club of Victoria webinar, Artificial Intelligence in Rural and Regional Journalism. My name's Sonja Heydeman. I'm the Director of the Digital News Academy, and I'm honoured to be on the Executive Committee of the Rural Press Club of Victoria, and I'm here in that capacity today. This is a huge room. There are so many people from newsrooms right around Australia, and I can see from the US as well as other people in associated sectors. This is the first time the Rural Press Club of Victoria has stepped into the AI discussion. And in fact, if there are some emojis inside, it is also the first time we've had an all-female panel as well for the Rural Press Club. We are so grateful that you're with us, and we hope that you will be wholeheartedly with us throughout this. A massive thanks to the club sponsors. Of course, our gold sponsors, the wonderful CBRE, Agriculture Victoria and Telstra. Silver sponsors TAC, the Weekly Times, Stock and Land, Marcus Oldham, Curry Communications, the Victorian Farmers Federation and Regional Angel Investor Network. Questions. I know you're going to have lots, so this is a wonderful opportunity for you to ask questions of our guests. We have the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. Please feel free to use it. We'll go to your questions as soon as we can. Christina Arampatzi is our moderator today. Christina works closely with me as a key member of the DNA, and she has a background in journalism. She's been a fact checker with the RMIT ABC Fact Check Unit and has held many senior operational roles. Today, we have two acclaimed experts in AI. Aimee Rinehart, Senior Product Manager, AI Strategy for Associated Press. Before joining AP, she was the Deputy Director of First Draft's New York Bureau, helping journalists and newsrooms to identify, verify and report on misinformation and disinformation through the 2018 and 2020 election cycles. Aimee started working online in 1996. She was a digital originator, a digital original, I guess, at the New York Times, and returned to print briefly as an editor at the Wall Street Journal Europe in Brussels. She served on the steering committee for AI procurement and use guidebook for newsrooms and has enormous experience with AI, particularly in small newsrooms. Rita Arrigo is also joining as Strategic Engagement Manager at CSIRO National AI Centre, focused on building a responsible AI network. So this is a world first cross-ecosystem collaboration aimed at establishing and sharing the best practice of responsible AI in the commercial sector. Now, previously a Deputy Director at the Centre of Industrial AI Research and Innovation, she's been Chief Digital Advisor at Microsoft. She cultivates innovation with emerging technologies, including AI, machine learning, and also mixed reality. Rita was appointed an AI ambassador and continues to advocate for ways AI can really reinvent experiences at work and in daily life. Now let's get started. If we could, please, if you want to pop some emojis down and perhaps put those hands together for both of our guests. Aimee Rinehart, to you first. We mentioned, of course, you are a leader in AI and you've worked extensively working with small newsrooms. Interestingly, we look at, say, Nieman Lab predictions for this year. They include that AI could well be widely adopted by smaller newsrooms, yet this is a significant shift from just 12 months prior to that, when it maybe wasn't foreshadowed. What's happening at the moment to perhaps warrant that recommendation?
Well, I think, thank you for having me, and thank you for such a nice, and I'm sorry, embarrassingly long introduction, but here I am. I think, gosh, with AI, everyone in news has seen this as another big digital disruption that they did not want, they did not ask for. So we went through like the 5 stages of grief. It was like denial, refuse, all of that. And now we've come to acceptance. I was in a meeting 2 weeks back where a person who was really not in favor of AI at all said, let's ask our news people what they're doing with AI, because we know they're using it. And so I was like, wow, if you've come around in less than a year, that means a lot of other people have come around to it. So I think we are at the acceptance phase of this grief process. And it's an exciting time. And I think the smaller the newsroom, the more they're experimenting because they just see so many benefits immediately. The larger the newsroom, there's just a lot more dependencies in a large newsroom. If you change one thing, it's going to change 6 other things that you don't expect. And so the larger newsrooms really have to get this right. Not to say that smaller newsrooms don't, but smaller newsrooms will just change it, and they're more nimble in that way.
Where are the particular opportunities that we're seeing? You've mentioned multiple opportunities, but where would be some of the first steps in for many of the smaller, say, rural regional newsrooms?
I mean, honestly, the sky's the limit. You can. I worked in a not completely rural newsroom, but one of my first jobs was covering police and fire, and then I was the weekend reporter, and I covered probably 10 county fairs in one summer. By the 8th or 9th county fair, I had and seen and done enough, but it's important to the community. So if I had a Chat GPT or a Gemini or a Claude, I might get a couple of quotes from people who attended that county fair. I might explain whether it was raining or sunshine and who won, the demolition derby, and then put that into ChatGPT and say, hey, can you make this a story? It's never going to win a prize, but it certainly helps people familiarize themselves with their paper and the work there, and it makes a decent story. And then I can go on and do enterprise reporting instead of having to really struggle with my 10th county fair.
Exactly, looking at Gen AI, but so many other opportunities around working with AI as well that can make enormous change to the way a newsroom may operationally function, even simple things like transcription that some newsrooms might not be using at the moment.
Oh my goodness. I am old enough to remember the cassette tape and a foot pedal. It was like a sewing machine where you would have to go back and forth and back and forth. And there are some people who are like, well, if I suffered, everybody else has to suffer. And I'm like, no one has to suffer with that. Transcription is amazing for newsrooms, for journalists on deadlines, for journalists who rely on tape recorders or recordings. It's an incredible service to use. It's not entirely accurate. It gets about 80% of things correct. It doesn't do well with just the slightest of accents. And it doesn't do well when 2 women are talking or there's crosstalk. So there's obviously in the training, they probably trained it on more men's voices than women. And I've been told that men have a wider range of speaking and women have a smaller range. So it's just hard for the AI to kind of grab onto to differentiate between some women's voices. So again, not perfect, but I think, if we can get these tools 80% of the way there, then it really takes a load off.
Absolutely. We talk about those opportunities, but then inherently there can be challenges, there can be risks. I suspect we'll have lots of questions about opportunities and risk from people in the room today. Going into risk, if I could introduce, we go to Rita now. Rita, as a starting point, when we're looking at AI, we are today centred on what's happening in rural and regional journalism. Are there distinct issues for risk for potentially rural regional newsrooms as opposed to some of the bigger market players? And I think, Rita, I think maybe mic on?
Now. Got it all happening.
Yes, she
Thank
is.
you. Thank you so much. I definitely think for rural and regional, there are certain risks around some of the issues that we're already seeing in news. We're seeing things like deep fakes and, the ability to be able to, recognize what's real and what's not. And I think that this is a real opportunity for rural to, look at things like AI-powered fact checking or to start to, really have these AI-powered research assistants or bring in more citizen journalist tools, which I think can make that massive difference. And as well in Australia, potentially even looking at, that multilingual collaboration that could generate a lot more interest in the rural area, in particular in our Indigenous people as well with different types of languages. So there are these opportunities, but there's also risks. And I think the National AI Centre is doing a lot of work in establishing some voluntary guardrails around organisation developing and deploying systems in these high-risk settings. And so these voluntary AI system standards are going to provide the industry with a practical voluntary best practice toolkit to make it easier to establish, what are some of the things that will make AI safer. And so I know that you've done a bit of work in that as well, Aimee, but the area that's probably the most relevant to news is things like labelling and watermarking of AI-generated materials, which is something that is super important when we're thinking about, respecting the truthness and taking away those risks around deep fakes and AI-generated imagery.
Aimee, I'd love your thoughts.
On the risks involved, journalists put themselves on the line every day. Every article is a risk, of a source calling you back and saying, "I never said that," or "You got it wrong," or maybe you did get something wrong, not on purpose. No journalist likes to get things wrong. I think I think the risk is when people think, okay, the machine is going to do all of this and I can just, go to bed. And we're not there yet. It's not that good. And, as at AP, we're putting together some proofs of concept around summarization, headlines, and translation from English into Spanish. And, what we're realizing and what new research out by Felix Simon supports is that the making of news is very idiosyncratic. There's tons of nuance involved in this, and AI, that's where it really breaks. AI breaks with nuance. It doesn't get those things that, we have. Still our brains are the best computers ever, and we're able to put things into context, historical context, and what is happening currently. So right now it can be very good as an input system for language, but its knowledge base, if you've all experimented with it, you realize that it's lacking, not always the truth. What it sends back can be problematic and something that you shouldn't necessarily run directly to press with.
Indeed. Rita, you mentioned that, and we're seeing this around the world with news groups, setting up various sort of codes of conduct, and there are so many, as just with AP, we've got newsrooms all over the world running through numerous AI experiments. I know Shipstead, they were one of the big ones in the early stages, with dozens and dozens of experiments rolling to see what might be useful and applicable within their newsrooms. In this room today, we will have some news groups that are already at the stage. They've got working parties around AI. They will also have codes of conduct being formulated. I'm pretty certain we have ACM would be represented in the room, and I'm certain that they're at that stage. But we will have other news groups, maybe not, that might have maybe 2 or 3 people even heading them. They might not be at the stage that they've considered what that first step could actually look like. So if we're looking at the first step to AI adoption and what people maybe should be considering, what's, from your perspective, a pathway into starting to maybe look at adoption, and what you need to do to prepare for that?
So I think with that pathway, being able to understand that potentially generative AI is not just the only thing that you could use. So being able to get yourself a broader education in AI, what about computer vision? What about, data visualizations and other kind of predictive journalism, or, hyperlocal insights, or being able to bring in augmented reality to really change the way your story is being told, and, provide overlays, etc. So I think getting a broader education is super important. And at the National AI Centre, we're launching a micro skill, and we're trying to get 1 million Australians to do this AI micro skill so that we can have a bit of a broader knowledge around AI. So stay tuned on that one. But I think that is a really important element. Do your 2.5 hours of, accredited training around knowing a little bit more about AI. And then the next thing is to kind of like really, having been in digital transformation, I think AI transformation is very similar. Is try to find the thing that's going to have the most impact on what you're doing, and the most ability to transform your news center, and always be conscious around the kind of things that Aimee's talking about. The risks of generative AI, where it can produce content that's inaccurate. So be able to like kind of think, do you want to do more enhanced data-driven storytelling? Do you want to do more immersive experiences? Do you want to do more automation and efficiency? Do you want to do more collaboration with other, other citizen journalists, or the multilingual? So really think about the areas that you want to work in, and then really specialize in that. And the other areas people often think about, you go, imagine where you want to be in 5 years time, and then work backwards type stuff. Be able to kind of become expert in those areas as well. But I do think that news is going to change dramatically from what you were talking about, Aimee, the beginning of that county fair, well, to actually really change that news to become much more immersive and more relevant to local people as well, and make them more involved in what's going on.
One of the things I have no doubt in the room, there'll be people possibly going, how much time do we have? We are under so much pressure. There never seems to be sort of enough members of the team to make it work as we'd like it to. Where am I going to find the time? If I'm a publisher, there are some publishers in the room today. If I'm a publisher, how am I going to have all of the information coming in? Now, obviously, Rita, there's a great little helping point from the National AI Centre with that new program. But when you're also trying to rally a team, how do you work with a team of journalists who are already feeling pressure to explain and to help them perhaps, experiment or adopt new technologies?
I think these productivity tools are really interesting, because that will give you that boost, like the kind of ability to start to tap into the generative AI around the fact checking and the language translation and the content generation. So that will loosen up a bit of time, and I think that is part of the journey, is to how do I get more time to experiment and be able to like enter these new worlds and think about different ways that news is going to work. So by getting that productivity boost, you can potentially have more time to look at different ways that you can create these more AI-powered, personalized experiences with news, I suppose. So have you experienced that, Aimee, in your work? Because I know that you've done a lot of work in, actually looking at some of the tools that you can use in newsrooms and the kind of benefits that they provide. Have you found that they've provided those productivity enhancements?
Well, that promise remains to be seen in terms of efficiency. The efficiency promise is a big question mark, because it does take, there's a huge learning curve to get it integrated into your systems, and to get people to use it, and to get people to rely on it then. So it's really difficult, I think, AI can save you time. There are workflow efficiencies involved in it, but I don't think it's as great as they had always promised. Now, again, if you're a 2 or 3 person newsroom, I think a tool like Bard, like Gemini, they renamed their tool. So now it's called Gemini.
Just to confuse us all.
That's how fast this space is moving. You wake up and now the tools are named something else. But, if you're a 2 or 3 person newsroom, this is your moment, because the tool is free, it's easy. And if you can bake a cake, you can you can stitch a couple of technologies together to create automations. And that's really the amazing part of this. I think, I don't want to say that it's going to be death of the third party app, but I think more newsrooms are going to be creating their own technologies, because this technology is so flexible and easy to work with. And I love what Rita said. Not everything needs AI. I know it feels that way right now, but most things don't need AI, frankly. There's tons of very basic process automations that can be really useful. There's a tool called If This Then That, and it has a free version of it, and it just creates some automation. So when you publish an article, it automatically goes to the social profiles you choose. We also created a framework for adoption of artificial intelligence tools, and this was really created not by us but by the 200 people who took our survey, and I'll share that with you to share with others afterward. But it basically looks at identifying a repetitive task, just one. And how do you do that? Well, we suggest you break down the news value chain to news gathering, production, distribution, or business operations, and sit over the shoulder of the people in one of those and just listen for their frustrations. Where are the points of tension? And think that is something we can solve. I bet we could put some automation in there. We might even could use AI, it depends. But really, your staff will tell you what is annoying them. And chances are that's a good place to start. But I would start with one project, just one. I know you want help in every department, in every workflow, but it will feel overwhelming. And I think working as closely as you can with the stakeholders involved. So if you're doing something for the newsroom, work with the news people, listen to what they need, and build along with them. You will get better adoption of the tools.
Aimee, one of the questions, and Rita particularly too, one of the things that we talk about a lot is around, of course, public trust. And there is concern with AI adoption, public trust, and if hypothetically, for example, one newsroom in Australia might have difficulty with that AI adoption process and it doesn't end favourably, is there a risk of further stress around public trust in journalism? And are you concerned by that?
Rita?
Trust is super important, and I think we've been seeing a lot of that happen. We had a bit of a scandal here in Australia where a politician, her outfit was changed to be a bit groovier, and I think that this was not in a rural setting, this was more in a city setting, but the journalist was like, I think the journalistic team was like, oh, the computer did it, and I think that this is a very a very difficult topic because computers are run by humans. So you can't just blame the computer, right? You have to be able to have a sense of responsibility. And I think that's where responsible AI comes in, being able to have governance and be able to understand, how that actually happened. And it wasn't just the computer, right? And I think that is a really important element that we need to take into that journey, is like having, and I love your, Aimee, when you're talking about this user-centered approach, talk to your users, make sure they're involved and they understand what's going on. And it's not just about flinging something over to a technology team and saying, fix this. It's about, being part of the process, because I think otherwise you do have these risks where you don't know what's going on with your news story, and you need to, really be part of that. But I do think the area of trustworthy news and the whole deceptive technologies around deep fakes is something that is going to uplift journalism in a lot of ways, because that's that ability for you to be able to say, this is real and it's not, and I think that's what people will look for. And I think it is a really exciting moment for journalists at the moment.
We're seeing, Aimee, please, to you.
Just that, public trust is always a concern, but I think large newsrooms haven't always been there for their audiences. There are Black publishers in the United States who have enormous trust with their readership, and it's generational. The grandmother clips something out for the grandkid to read, and they trust everything that's in there. And these are newsrooms that are experimenting with using ChatGPT to create headlines and summaries. And just because they might get something wrong, there's no breach of trust with their audience. And I think mainstream publishers really have to ask themselves hard questions. Why is that? Why is it that they have such a deep connection with their audience, that their audience trusts them even when they get it wrong, even when they screw up? And I think that there's a real lesson in there for mainstream publishers, that if our trust is so precarious that something like AI is going to tip it over, then it's not AI that's the problem.
So in many ways, for many of our rural regional Australian publishers and journalists, you might consider there is an advantage that there is a different kind of connection potentially to audiences as well.
Yeah.
Now, I'm noticing the time. Please make sure you keep questions coming. We will go to questions in just a moment. I'd like to just quickly ask, in terms of barrier to entry for AI, are we seeing that some news groups are finding this a more considerable barrier than others?
I think it's we will look back on this as like the glory days of AI, because it is there is a competition among 4 or 5 development companies, and they've suppressed their prices. So it's never been cheaper. In some cases, it's free to use these tools. And like I said, it's all language driven. It's prompt driven. You no longer have to be a coder in order to write code. They say the next coding language is English. Lucky for us, right? But there is no barrier to entry, and I think that that democratization of this tool is what maybe has so many previous gatekeepers very upset.
So without that barrier to entry in that very practical sense, in a cost-based sense, but is there a barrier to entry in terms of planning, or perhaps an understanding of the opportunities out there? So creating opportunities for education within either different news groups or potentially within organisations and groups like the Rural Press Club of Victoria and others, where there is an emphasis on making sure that there's broad information available. I'd love to throw now to Christina Arampatzi. Christina is moderating, of course, today's session. We've been really fortunate that there have been, actually, there's so much interest in the session. We have had a number of publishers pop some early questions through, even because I think there's been that enthusiasm there. Please, everyone, if you could welcome Christina. Christina, over to you.
Hello, Aimee, Rita, thank you very, very much for joining us tonight for Aimee and this morning for Rita. We did have a few questions come through early from the South Gippsland Sentinel Times News Group, Wangaratta Chronicle. Thank you very much for sending them through. You can keep popping questions in the Q&A while I go through all of these with Rita and Aimee. Off the back of your conversation, Rita mentioned the clothing alteration that became a scandal in Australia, and it was blamed on AI. And one of the questions that came through early on did touch on that. What sort of checks could be put in place prior to editors' sign-off to avoid such occurrences, do you think? And I'd be happy to hear from both of you. Are there any? It becomes even harder. Image generation is a thing. Now it's getting even harder to spot with AI. Any checks, balances, any tips that you think should be put in place, changing the workflow and helping?
I think it is still a bit of a manual task in these areas, because it is about curation of your imagery. But I do know that with some of the promises around the ability to provide the labelling, what we're calling watermarking, that will have a dramatic effect on your ability to be able to say this is a genuine image. So these kind of new watermarking technologies will support a lot of those challenges.
Yeah, and I think just I think people get lost in the technology. They think that they don't have what they need to understand images, for example. But journalists, you see the world in such a great way. I think, like, you investigate, you interrogate everything. And if you use your regular senses around that, if you look at an image, you're like, could that possibly have been taken, is this an image? Are the shadows all falling in the right direction? Is it in the right location? Is the weather correct? And, you can check weather, like, was it sunny yesterday? And if so, or when did it rain? Like, there are many investigations that you can do without any technology skills whatsoever. It's just your good old fashioned reporter's eye and editor's eye scrutinizing things. I think one of the things I'm really concerned about is not necessarily images and video, but also so text that people don't read the summaries because they're like, oh, it probably got it right, you know, and so that there's a real turning off of that editor's brain because it looks done. But the question, you know, will be, is it really done? Is it done to the way that your newsroom's standards require?
Attention to detail and basically a change of mentality. Just keep checking everything that passes through your hands and having that, I guess, being aware that there might be an issue and trusting your gut instinct, saying,
Yeah.
is there something there? A question that came through, Alice Nicholas asked, her writer asked to remove his byline saying he used ChatGPT and revised the article. Can we discuss plagiarism? And another question that had come through before was talking about copyright. When does a body of work stops being the journalist's work and starts being the AI's work? It's a huge discussion, but what are your thoughts on how this is going? Aimee, we can start with you.
Okay. I mean, what a confession, Alice, that you got from your writer. I hope there wasn't any consequences because they were being honest. I don't think it's a plagiarism issue, frankly, because you could argue that the AIs themselves have plagiarized, like they have scooped up the internet without asking, and just helped themselves to all of our information. So I think your writer was correct to remove the byline, but for transparency from your audiences, you know, AP since 2014 we've used what I call baby AI, natural language generation, to create earnings reports, and those are all automated by a templatized version of a news brief, and those templates were set by editors, and we get a spreadsheet of earnings reports from the stock exchange, and so it's an incredibly reliable system. We have a tagline below every story that we run like that that indicates the company we work with to make that happen, and also the data set that we use, that we're pulling from. So I think transparency with your audience is really critical, and to be clear, so maybe it's a tagline that this article was reported maybe by your writer, but written by ChatGPT.
Rita, any thoughts on this?
I think the copyright issues are currently, you know, a challenge, and I think, you know, there's a lot of work being done in copyright reform at the moment around, you know, thinking about, you know, who owns this content, etc. And I think we will see, and you know, particularly in Australia, our copyright laws you know, there's a lot of modernization that's kind of going on in that space. But yeah, I think it's been very confusing particularly for novelists, because like all this data has been taken and, you know, being reused, but then, you know, when you do write something, it does go out into the world and it becomes knowledge in a lot of ways. And so it's really hard to kind of say, okay, I wrote that article and now people are quoting it, but that's my copyright, but are they allowed? And so, yeah, there's a lot of challenges in thinking about that. So yeah, it's an area of a lot of debate at the moment.
And every country has different copyright rules. And this is, you know, like everything on the web, it's global. So where does it start? Well, you know, the tech firms are in the US primarily, and there's been no regulation or reining them in any way. So it's, you know, well, I'm relying on the Europeans to kind of control this a bit more. But yeah, it's the copyright won't be decided for a while now. The New York Times is suing OpenAI and Microsoft over copyright infringement, but that could take years to settle.
And I think that the Europeans they've been working on that AI regulation for 3 years. I think it's coming to hopefully a head, because it's a very, very tough regulation to pull together and so many parameters to consider. Alex just asked on the chat, how do you think AI will interplay with the push towards the paid subscription model now used by many media outlets? Aimee, we can start with you.
So the interplay with like the paywall content?
Yeah.
I think we're in trouble, frankly. Like, I think we're this year, all the search engines are going to move to generative AI. Even Perplexity, which is a smaller new search engine, if you search for something in Perplexity, you'll get a summary of what you're searching for and a few links. And if somebody feels satisfied by that summary, the impetus to click on one of those links really drops. You know, Google has rolled it out in beta, I think, to 120 countries right now, their generative search. Many newsrooms in the US, local newsrooms, depended on half of their referrals coming from Facebook. Those dropped last year. Those took a steep drop. And then the other half came from Google search. So if they're not being referred to and no one's clicking on them, then it's like the final nail in the coffin of journalism, because we will have had our business model taken over with classified advertising. It's not a good moment for us, and I think that's why the copyright issue is so important. But as Rita mentioned, like, you know, once something is out there in the ether, it's meant to be learned and absorbed, and that might be what the judges determine.
But I think, but this is where I was kind of discussing this need for innovation. So, like, you know, the internet happened 20 years ago, and, you know, news became something that we could read online, and we didn't buy a newspaper anymore, and then we subscribed to newspapers. But now there's this new age of AI as well as more interactive journalism. So is this an opportunity to kind of create stuff that's new, that is that kind of more you know, uses different types of data visualization, uses more immersive experiences. You know, I have this dream that, you know, I'm not just going to sit and read the newspaper, but someone's going to come and read it to me, you know, and so those kind of things that we need to be innovative. And I think that's an area that journalists have always played in. And some of the work that, you know, Sonja's been doing in the Digital Academy is about kind of transferring some of these skills from not just writing, but also to these other ways of being able to deliver news. And I think that is going to be the new place to innovate. And I think, you know, paywalls were always very temporary to me. They were just a way of being able to deal with this challenge that, you know, that newspapers were having, were not being able to have a revenue model, but to find new revenue models around that. And I think really tapping into this ability to show that, you know, the journalists are able to have trust with people is one of those areas that I think is super important.
Yeah, we also had a chat recently with Lena K. Samuelson from Schibsted, and they have you know, the Schibsted Future Report came out, and they are trying, like you said, Rita, all these innovative ways of having AI generated using the voice of one of the presenters read all the articles. And you know, if you're following Schibsted, you can have the news read to you by one of their journalists. But a lot of newsrooms around the world are actually starting to experiment and started to use finding ways to reach their audiences and see how AI can help them in that, and maybe even streamline it. You can't have a presenter read all the articles, so you would need lots of days for that. Rachel asked, are there any tips or tricks to convince older Russelton journalists that AI can be help, not a hindrance, and won't take their jobs? What are the How do you get them on board? How do you try and soften them up?
I think it's you know, thinking about the risks, you know, like, and I think some of these amazing you know, tools that are available, you know, that they are amazing, but there's also risks around, you know, the erosion of journalist skills, or like the erosions around these things that I was talking about. Well, you know, you've got to still look at the picture, and you still got to, you know, read the article and make sure. So I think it's assuring them that these journalistic skills are going to be like the key to the next stage, but that you don't want to ignore some of these other kind of content generation and, you know, fact checking tools that are out there. So, but I think that making it really important to people to realize that their traditional skills are still going to be super important in what we're doing.
Yeah, in my experience, it's a mindset, not an age. People either come and are like, what is that? That is so cool. Let me see what I can do here. Or that is really dangerous. And I think I should know more about it. And you know who you are. You might have been a computer assisted reporter in the day. You might have, looked at data and spreadsheets a lot sooner than your other colleagues. Those are the people who are interested in this. And I think, we are communicators. That's why we got into this business. And this is another way that people are going to communicate with each other. And it's really important to stay curious and to, each one teach one. So if you know someone who is trepidatious with these new technologies, show them how it works. Because the first time I used ChatGPT, I was flabbergasted. I was like, this is going to eat away at every aspect of our business model, but still it is fascinating. And I just really encourage everybody to take this as a time of learning and experimentation. And it's okay to get things wrong before you go to press. It's after you go to press that's the problem. But experiment beforehand and see if you can take some repetitive work off of your employees. It's a retention play. It's it's a recruitment play. Young bright things don't want to be saddled with doing the automated grain report every day. They want to be out there doing something interesting. So I think it could really help a lot of newsrooms in ways that aren't even AI related, but like just overall general happiness of your employees.
And it's basically taking away all the mundane work, all the mundane jobs, or some of them, helping
That's
you
the
in
hope.
others.
Yeah.
So that's the hope, to get you to the point where you can be more creative. And it goes back to trust, because trusting in the people, trusting in the journalists behind something, to check everything, the editors, to make sure that's the hope I'm getting. It's going to lead us to. Who am I trusting? Am I trusting the AI? I know this was created by AI or assisted by AI or prompted, but I'm trusting the person. I'm trusting the journalist to do their job and get me the news. Essentially,
The brand that's associated with it, and I think removing a lot of these repetitive tasks will help us focus on these critical thinking, investigation, and storytelling. Like, that's stuff that we love about journalism, that often, you don't get to do 100% of your job because you're busy, doing all this other stuff that exists in newsrooms.
And that output that's repetitive is oftentimes the reason why people continue to subscribe. So, in the US, it's like lunch menu items for the week at a public school, calendar listings, that kind of stuff. All of that stuff can be offloaded to automation. And that is why people continue to subscribe. It's often not for your reporting. It's because they get information that helps them understand how to live their life that week or that day.
The day-to-day. A question came through from Charlotte saying, is there scope for media releases to be written by AI? And if so, how do we know the difference? And is there any issue? Are there any issues around legalities of rewriting media releases which may have been written by AI? It comes back to that transparency conversation. Rita?
It's really interesting. I was actually doing an event yesterday where one of our AI startups, Sapia.ai, has developed a technology to understand whether you are actually using generative AI in your job interviews and your resumes. And so it can detect if you've used generative AI to write your resume or your answers to an interview. And I think that's really interesting because it doesn't actually delete them or say, you're bad. It just kind of alerts that to the employer that this was written by generative AI. So in your question where you're talking about, I think your question was around how do you know if something's written, a press release is written? I think, people in marketing, it's been one of the biggest areas for productivity, is using generative AI to generate some of that social content as well as the press content, as well as that kind of stuff. So I think it's going to be there from the, it's already there, but I think it's about, maintaining the quality of the writing as well, because you can really tell sometimes if it has been written by generative AI and it hasn't been refined by a human eye or a human tongue or human language. I don't know how to say it, but you can really tell. It feels like you're reading this kind of thick garbage that isn't consistently, harmonious in the way that we speak and we communicate, and the tone is sometimes taken fluid. Thank you. The tone is sometimes taken out. But I do think in a lot of these areas, like press releases, they're often it is being used. But yeah, but I think we will start to be more detecting of that.
Aimee?
Yeah, I mean, it flowery language and platitudes and things like that that are often in press releases are like ChatGPT's A game. So I think it's a perfect example of how it can be used. I also think grant writing, if you're writing for grants for your newsroom, it's a great way to like plop in the information. Like, we have a circulation of this size, we've been around this long, this is what we hope to do with the money, and then just ask ChatGPT to make it pretty, and it will. Of course, you want to read it and make sure that it's accurate. But yeah, I think people who write press releases, your job is going to change significantly. You'll have to have all of those ingredients that should go into that report. But I think it'll make your work better. I do, and I don't think it'll take it away.
Because you still have to enhance it and, manage it and that kind of stuff. There's a lot of interest in, automated content for social, because I think that's an area that, needs a lot of data to feed it. And, automating that kind of content is an area that a lot of marketing departments are really thinking about.
Yeah.
Aside from the automated content or your little assistant that's helping you write something and make it pretty, there's a lot of some questions came through. There are other tools that actually help you do the groundwork as a journalist. Ruby asked, do you have any tips of how we can use AI to go through lists such as council meeting agendas or court lists to save time? We actually teach a tool called Google Pinpoint, and that has been around for quite some time and is helping with investigative work. Any other tips, or do you see it more extensively? It's not just ChatGPT or no?
I mean, that's how the Panama Papers, that's how they went through all those troves of data and input. And I think it's an excellent use of AI. It's not going to catch everything, but if it can reduce, 100,000 pages to like 10,000 pages, I think it will save you some time.
And I think there's a big movement in that. I was at a conference yesterday where they were talking about the National Film Archive and how they've kind of built their own large language model that will allow you to search that archive. And I think we're going to see a lot of that coming out from the governments and councils to make it easier for you to access that in that large language model style that we're getting used to with things like ChatGPT and Gemini, where you can add that content to your model, your pre-trained model, and allow you to search that as well. And I think we will see a lot of that happening, because that is going to really help with that fact checking and with the investigative journalism that is often so hard to find things. Maybe that's something that journalists need to encourage councils to do, to turn that into something that's much more accessible by AI.
Yeah. Another question came through with that. So can we discuss the use of AI to produce infographics? What platforms are available? Maybe some examples. Again, other uses of AI that go beyond the open language models, the LLMs.
Yes.
Rita?
Yeah. So we've got a couple that, you know, Canva's also is an Australian invention. It's super good at that kind of stuff, to be able to pull in data and make it look like an infographic and those kind of things. But I think this is an emerging area of technology, so we will see a lot more happening in that space, because I think that's what's going to create the interactivity that we want, the ability to, you know, drill down and really understand data and take that that information-driven journalism to the next level. How about you, Aimee? What have you seen in the US?
For graphics, you know, people have been very trepidatious to publish anything specific, any publishable output. But of course, as Rita mentioned, Canva is a game changer for lots of people. And I think, you know, Midjourney, Stable Diffusion, those are, and DALL-E, those can produce interesting results, but not really around graphics, but more around imagery. And I've seen there's a publication in the US called Neiman Lab, which services the journalism industry, and they've started to use on their website Hero Image images from Midjourney. What's interesting is in the cut line, they note that it's Midjourney, and they also write out the prompt. And I think in terms of transparency, that's such a good way to show your readership that this is an AI generated image and this is how we got to it.
Matt mentioned on the question that we just touched on before, the tools that scan through agendas. Do you think that, and it goes on overall in the processes and workflows, if you have to review what the AI, what Google Pinpoint or any other tool is doing, are you saving time, or are you better off doing the work yourself? Aimee.
That's the thing, is sometimes you can waste so much time and it's just easier to read the document, you know? So I just think, you know, you're gonna have to experiment with it. There's a tool called Gumshoe from New York University that does a little bit of that, parsing through big sets of documents that I think, I believe it's free to use, that can be very helpful. Because sometimes, you know, in terms of like, entities saying, well, we gave you everything we had. It's like, you gave us so much that you buried the information. So like, it's not full disclosure if you give us 200,000 pages to review, you know what I mean? It's just death by 1,000 paper cuts or 1,000,000 paper cuts, but it's, yeah. So yes, I think this is one of the better, more promising ways of using AI.
But you can take a whole PDF and put it into something like, you know, Bing, OpenAI or Bing Chat or even Google Gemini, and it will summarize it for you. And I think there is definitely some time saving in that, because like Aimee said, you might miss something buried in those, you know, those documents.
And there's a recent, and you'll get a link to this after the call, but a generative AI in the newsroom blog. They recently had someone from the Philippines create their own GPT and do exactly this: send up PDFs of the agenda, and then prompt it to say, "Is there anything interesting?" And it found that they overspent. They spent too much money on computers. They went way over the budget. And, you know, they said, I don't know if I would have seen it otherwise, because it's, you know, several hundred pages long, but like, that's a great use case. So if you haven't experimented with GPTs, I think there's a small cost to that every month, but it might be worth it for you in your newsroom if you are often given huge data sets or huge documents to try and sift through.
The other area that I'm finding is amazing. Like, a lot of people because I deal with a lot of AI companies, they will bring their bot to a meeting, and that bot will summarize and give actions and highlight, etc. So that's another area that you might find in journalism, that rather than the old tape recorder, you might bring an AI to kind of listen in and then summarize and give you information and specifically, you know, help you out in those areas.
On that, loosely connecting, Alice said, for young writers, for senior journalists, those in the business, it's useful. For young writers, the negative effect is for them to be lazy in producing accurate reporting. Is that a risk? Is that something that can happen? being too reliant on it and getting lazy?
A lot of people do say it's a risk that, there will be erosion of journalism skills, but, was there a risk that we became bad readers when the internet happened because all the information was out there? Yes,
We read more, right?
we read
read
more.
because
But
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I don't buy that argument at all. I really don't. I think, some people are really good reporters and some people are really good writers. It is really hard to find those two qualities in one person. So if you're a really good reporter, you've got your quotes, you've got background, you've got all this interesting details, and you need a little help. I mean, maybe, again, depending on your newsroom size and the standards that you've established, that may be a solution for you. If your reporter, if you're reporting in English and English is their second language, it might be very helpful for them to figure out the articles, which articles go in front of what, and plural and all those other idiosyncrasies. So I think it can be really helpful in those ways. And I don't like it when people dunk on this generation. They're quirky, but they are hard workers.
An anonymous asked, will AI give the owner of the media more or less influence on the content in your opinions, Aimee?
Will AI give the owner of the media more or less influence on content? So if you create something, then it's yours? Is it yours? Is it your copyright?
Is it your copyright, or are you? I'm not sure what they mean, but I'm getting is being prompt and basically changing the way you were going. Would it really affect the way you think if you brainstorm with AI and say, these are my thoughts? Is there a risk of being affected or being essentially driven by what the AI given you? Maybe that's what I'm getting.
I don't know. I'm
I'm
finding it's more like a mirror. It's like what you put in is what you get out type thing. So because it's the way you prompt it and the way you work with it. So it's almost like you're talking to yourself, but with a very sophisticated back end type thing. I don't know. Do you sometimes feel like that, Aimee, that it's not?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And today is the 1-year anniversary of the New York Times reporter who had that very intimate conversation with ChatGPT, who encouraged him to leave his wife. And he said it was the weirdest experience he'd ever had in his whole life. But I think, look, we're staring into a very small box. It's very isolating. It can feel intimate. It happens late at night. Nothing else is going on. And you develop a strange connection. And I think it's easy for that to slip in the brain because it feels real. Like the responses, it does feel like you're having a conversation. And then you have to realize, no, it's just a bunch of ones and zeros and probability around what the next word should be.
I know that Sonja has joined us, but if I may ask one sneaky little question at the end of it, what trends do you see? Where do you see the newsrooms being in 3 to 5 years' time with the explosion of AI? How do you see them working and operating? Small newsrooms and big newsrooms. Aimee?
My hope is that we'll be working with radical collaboration, and that newsrooms will not see each other as competitors. They will see each other as helpers to figure out AI, to maybe even collaborate around a large language model, and gain more independence in terms of the technology that they use and the technology they plug into. So I just think right now it's a critical moment. And, if we've invested in, 50-ton presses and rooms for broadcast of, rooms of servers and hardware for broadcasters, once we don't need the printing presses and the rooms for servers, we have some money to pool to be able to chart our own course. So that's my big hope of this moment. It's not going to happen tomorrow, but I could see 10, 15 years from now that might be where we are going to be if we're going to be vibrant and relevant to the communities we serve.
Rita?
I think that's just a brilliant approach, because we all need journalism and we need storytelling and we need that local connection. And I think there is a reinvention, but I think it's, I don't think it's the death of journalism. I think it's this reinvention that I'm super excited about, and this more immersive kind of experience. So I have a lot of faith in journalism reinventing itself.
And what beautiful final words. Thank you so much, everyone. I'm conscious of time. Thank you so much to Aimee, Rinehart, Rita, Arrigo, Christina, Arampatzi, and to all of you for being here today. If you enjoyed this session, if you have questions, would like to give us some feedback in chat, of course, we would love to see it. We will have any additional resources made available to you on the Press Club website when we upload this session as well. Once again, a massive thank you to our sponsors, our gold sponsor, and our very special sponsor for today, CBRE. Thank you so much. Of course, Agriculture Victoria, Telstra, TAC, the Weekly Times, Stock and Land, Marcus Oldham, Curra Communications, the Victorian Farmers Federation, and Regional Angel Investor Network. Thank you so much to the many members of the Rural Press Club of Victoria for bringing this event together. Thank you, everyone. Wishing you a wonderful rest of the day, and we look forward to seeing you again. Bye-bye.